So in this lesson, we're going to learn how to set up our SQLite database. And in fact, I'm showing you the line of code here that is really about the only line of SQL code directly that you're going to write. Android has some methods that are going to shield us from most of it. But this is actually pretty much raw SQL, right? So creating tables and so on, right? But we'll walk you all through this. So I'll be honest, a lot of the code that we're going to be writing today, I'd consider fairly boilerplate. And we're going to be writing some things in a couple of classes to set up the database, right? So again, this whole sort of interface between the model and the database is going to be done in our data adapter. So today's class, we're going to be working on the ScoreDbHelper class, and that's going to supply the CRUD methods. It's also going to give us the keys that we're going to be using for our database, the other constants, and so on. And then within that, we're going to have a little subclass here that is a SQLite Open Helper, right? And that's actually what's going to create and upgrade and return the database, right? So a lot of really sort of grunt work that we don't want to have to do. All right, so in our code, we're going to start off by going to the data adapter and stubbing in a few methods. So we need a few different things. So the first thing we need is a constructor. So I'm going to make a ScoreDbHelper constructor, and this guy is going to take a context. Oops. Something like that. And what this is going to do is it's going to create our SQLite Open Helper. That's going to be its purpose in life. Let's go ahead and import context. And then we're going to have an open and a close method. All right, so let's see. So make a method here that is void, just called open, and that's going to open the database. And then, as you might expect, make a void method here called close, and that's going to close the database. Okay. No, those are not gonna do all the work. Certainly, a lot of the heavy lifting is going to be done by the helper class, but we're going to need a couple of instance variables here. So let's go ahead and make so SQLite Open Helper. All right, and I'm going to call this my Open Helper. And then I'm going to need a variable for the database itself. So this guy is going to be just a SQLite database, and I'm going to call this my database. All right, just like that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we just made here. There's our stubs. Let's take a look here at these guys. So what are each one of these, right? So first of all, we'll look at the Open Helper. A lot of really boilerplate stuff that are pretty much always the same, right? So Android is going to give us this class here, and it's going to do pretty much all that work. So very nicely. We're going to do some quick customization for it. So we're actually going to override this class in a minute. And then there's the database itself, okay, so that contains the tables and so on, right? So we have an instance of the database, right? So we use the Open Helper pretty much in the beginning to get it set up, and then we'll be making calls to the database frequently as the program is running and we want to update it. All right, so what does our helper class look like, right? So it can be a private class nested within our ScoreData adapter. We can call this guy whatever we want, ScoreDbHelper, that's fine. And we see that it extends our SQLite Open Helper, right? And it itself is going to have a few different methods here. These are going to be required, right? So we'll see that Eclipse is going to kind of help lead us right through this. So we're going to construct one and pass in some of our constants, and then we're going to create an upgrade. Right? Let's go ahead into Eclipse and do that. All right, so down below my open and close, I'm going to make my class here. So private, I can have it static if I want. Class here called ScoreDbHelper, and that guy is going to extend SQLite Open Helper. All right, that's an abstract class, so we're going to have to add some other methods here. So if I say unimplemented methods, it's going to stub in onCreate and onUpgrade. It's also going to complain that I don't have a constructor. So let's go ahead here and add a constructor. So it gives us our choice here of ones to add. I'm going to grab the first one. And we'll see that it actually expects a whole bunch of things here. It turns out that some of these things we're just going to be hard coding anyway, right? So the name of the database, right? So that's no big deal. That's actually going to be the name of the database, which I have a constant for. There's this factory that it turns out we can just use null, and the version we also have a constant for that. So it turns out that actually to construct our overloaded ScoreDbHelper here, we don't need these other things because we hard coded in them. The only thing we need is the context, right? So we'll just do that. All right, so let's go ahead and define the open and closing in terms of this database here. So creating a SQLite open helper, that's actually not too hard to do here. I can take my open helper, and that's going to be a new ScoreDbHelper, and the context I'll just pass right along, right? Oops. So save that guy right there. What does it mean to open the database, right? So we're going to take the database here, and we're going to ask our open helper. We're going to say, hey, can you give me a database? And I have a couple of options here to get a readable one or a writable one. Never seen anyone use just a readable one. It makes a lot more sense if you can write to your database as well. So we're going to go ahead and get a writable database, right? And that will give us an instance of it that we can use throughout the time that our program is running. Right. Closing. So to close our adapter, all that we're going to do is turn around and tell the database to close itself. And this is something that we would do like when our activity or our application is destroyed, right? So looks good. Going back here, so we've stubbed those guys in. We defined our adapter functions here, so we're kind of like relying upon this ScoreDbHelper that we haven't really filled in all the guts of. That's okay. We're going to need to do a little bit more before we can fill out the guts. So we open it by getting a writable database, and we close it. No big deal. Certainly, we have work to do on the inner class to make that happen. All right. For it to work, we need to add in some more constants. So the first thing is that we have to figure out, well, what's going into our table, right? So we looked at a picture in an earlier lesson that said that essentially that each row in the table needed to have an ID, and it needed to have the name of the person and then their score, right? So we're going to want keys for each of those guys. Keys are just going to be strings like usual. And when we do them, we can actually use whatever name we want here. But I will say that the naming convention for IDs in Android is to use an underscore first. And I've read that there is code that depends on it, so I don't dare change that guy, right? So we'll use underscore lowercase ID. All right, so let's go ahead and add those. All right, so in here, underneath our constants, we will say that we're going to have our keys, right? So we'll say static final string key underscore ID, which is going to be the underscore lowercase ID here. And then we have a couple more. So a key for the person's name and a key for their score. And we'll just call these name and score. Okay, like so. Once we've done that, we have a little bit of SQL to write, although not actually that much, right? So this really is the only SQL that you're going to write, and it's going to be some code to destroy a table, which we call dropping a table, and then creating the table itself, right? So this is really the only SQL. so let's see what's going on here. A drop statement. SQL, generally everything is all capitalized. So we're going to say, drop the table if it exists, and then give it the name of our table, right? And that's it, right? The create statement is a little bit more complicated. I mean, some people would hard code this whole thing here as one big long line. Create table, scores, and then parentheses. Give it a bunch of keys. You'll notice that these guys here are just a key and then a type. And then for the primary key, we need to give it a little bit more information here, so some modifiers, and then a comma, space, and then every other one is just going to be a key, and then what type it is, comma, space, the key, and then what type it is, and then nothing at the end, right? Except for close parens. All right. We're doing all this here using a string builder, so this is happening statically when the class is first loaded, right? So let's go ahead and type this in. Not a big deal. You're free if you want to if you just want to do a copy and paste on this. I'm okay with that. All right. So I'm going to create these up with the other constants here, and so static final string drop statement. Okay, just finished up here, and just wanted to point out a couple things. You might, even wonder why did we put the closing paren in its own append statement here, and it's basically just for if we wanted to make changes later on, if we wanted to add a key, we could just go ahead and pop that guy, make another line like this, right? So just for maintainability. All right, that looks great. Let's go ahead and use these guys, right? So whenever we have SQL statements, we're going to execute them. So I'm going down into my onCreate method right now, right? And let's go ahead and do this. So I'm going to ask for my database. Hey database, if you would do the following, right? Actually, we'll use the database that was passed in here. So db.exec SQL, right? And we see that this is going to allow us to execute a single statement here, or anything that doesn't return data, right? So that's about as raw as we're going to get. And simply, let's just go ahead and execute the create statement. All right. So nothing major there. Upgrading the database. I'm sure there's plenty of ways to do this. We're going to do the one that I know, which is to go ahead and to basically drop the table and then recreate it, right? So let's go ahead and put in a log. Probably worth doing here. So I think we had in our scores, list activity, I think we had a constant for this guy. So SQLite Scores SLS. It's going to be our log tag, and we'll say something like, we're upgrading the database from version, and then old version to new version, and import log, and then we can drop it. So db.exec SQL, our drop statement. Oops, grabbed the wrong one there. And then finally, we want to recreate the table itself, which we can just do by calling onCreate with the database. All right, so that looks good. Back to our slides. That's essentially what we just did right here. Again, we're telling the helper, hey, if you're ever asked to create, what I want you to do is to execute the SQL code that we had written, right? That's going to create our table. Certainly if we had multiple tables, then we'd have multiple create statements here, so we'd execute a couple lines of SQL. And if you're ever asked to upgrade for whatever reason, between different versions here, then we want to log a message and go ahead and then drop and recreate our tables. Again, we're not worrying about trying to maintain the data that's in there if we add a database upgrade. Okay. All right. So it looks good. What next? All right. So back in our activity, we're going to need a couple of things if we want to use any of this. We're going to want to make an instance of our ScoreData adapter. So we're going to need a field for that. And then we're going to need an instance also, since we blew away the array adapter, we're going to need one that's called a simple cursor adapter. Right? And remember that this is just another type of adapter. When we studied adapters, we said that array adapters were one of them. Right? Simple cursor adapter is another class that extends base adapter. Right? So we can we're going to have an instance of that. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and do that. So ScoreData adapter. Simple cursor adapter, my cursor. All right, let's use these guys. So I'm going to need to construct them here. So I'm going to go into my onCreate, right? And first of all, I'll make an instance of my ScoreData adapter. That's going to be a new instance here, and I'll pass in the context is going to be this, and then the cursor. Let's see, cursor. I think we'll actually hold off on a little bit here. Let's not forget to do one more thing here, which is I'm going to call my open method. All right, which will open up my database. All right. Getting caught up here, so that's exactly what we did. So we create our instance, and we called our open, right, that we wrote. One more thing, as far as our setting things up here, is that we're going to have to fix our model, right? So our model, we're going to store the ID, the database ID, along with the name and score. So we'll add an ID here, which is actually in Java, it's of type long. And we will just write some simple getters and setters for them. All right. So I went through here and I added the ID. All right. So my ID and then a getter and setter for them. And that basically does it, right? So I would say that we've done really the grunt work here in setting up the database, right? So it's time for the magic to start here. In our next lessons, we're actually going to be backing up our CRUD methods, which is the part that I find much more fun, right? So we'll see you for the next lesson.